Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate you all giving me your time. So, just to follow up on that introduction, my work is really focused on peering into the future, studying trends, where things are headed 10, 20, 30 years out, and finding these blips on the horizon of potential areas of opportunity to create what I refer to as restorative futures, futures full of equity and sustainability. And what I do is once I've kind of identified these areas of opportunity in the future, I start to create a trail of breadcrumbs that lead back to the present in order to identify that first initial step of opportunity to lead to manifesting those restorative futures. And so the work that I do is really in large part informed and inspired by the experience I had coming out of visiting New Orleans post Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath that proceeded after the hurricane struck. And so, as an architecture student, seeing that devastation and having the opportunity to volunteer on the ground really changed the way that I look at life and really left me with this question of how can I, as a designer, start to develop communities and designs that are able to prevent this from happening. And so, in exploration of that, I started discovering that nature has a lot of great solutions. And there's this brilliant quote from Albert Einstein that says, "Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better." And so that's what I do. I study biology as a way of understanding areas of opportunity for innovative and creative solutions. And so, in exploring the present times that we're in, the question that comes to mind is this idea of how can we build and maintain adaptive communities, especially during times of rapid change. And as I explored some potential biological models or champions that we might be able to follow, it led me to this conversation that I want to have with you all around the birds and the bees. Now, this conversation is not necessarily the one that many of you might have had before, but I hope you find it engaging nonetheless. So let's start with the bees. In many ways, bees are master mathematicians. They have perfected the art of taking their resources and putting them, storing them, packaging them in the most efficient shape that has been identified by scientists, which is the hexagonal shape. Past just this modular structure that they're able to create, you also see that the way that the hexagon is formed is a compelling strategy in and of itself. The fact that worker bees actually will take honey, their available resource, and by ingesting it, they actually convert some of the sugars of the honey into a wax that is secreted on their abdomen and start to chew on this wax so that it's malleable. And then they take this now malleable wax and piece by piece, they start to add the wax and form the shapes of what will become the hexagonal pattern. And there's just something about taking your available resources, but making it malleable so that it can serve as a building block to a specific environment. In addition to that, bees are democratic. So what you're about to see is this bee performing what's referred to as a waggle dance. And what's to note about this waggle dance is the fact that it is actually a list of coordinates based on calculated sun angles that provide the suggested location to what that particular bee believes is an ideal site for a new community. And so what then happens is other bees will start to go out to that suggested location, and if they agree that it is an acceptable site, after they've assessed it, they'll fly back and start to perform the exact same waggle dance. And what eventually happens is you have a majority of bees that start to perform the exact same dance. And once you have that majority, that is the agreed upon location for where the next community will be built. So bees are democratic in how they select their next communities. They build from the bottom up, piece by piece, with these modular components that are malleable, and they do democracy through twerking. So it's win-win all around. It's a really compelling community these bees have. And while birds aren't necessarily as democratic in their dances, they are great choreographers, especially the common starling. One thing I love about the common starling is that process that's referred to as murmurations. And so what you're looking at is a collection of thousands of individuals that are in alignment, in sync, forming one giant community around a common interest. And that common interest for the starlings is this idea of survival. Murmurations are formed, it's believed, to avoid a single bird from getting picked off by a more predatory bird. So something to note is the fact that there is no lead bird in these murmurations. Oftentimes, birds who have a strong familiarity with an environment or might be the strongest bird, they will often take the lead at certain times, but there is no one bird leading this murmuration, makes it all the more compelling in how it's able to shift and move so dynamically and nearly instantaneous. The other thing to note when looking at this is there's a lot of what's called collective dynamics at play, which are essentially the rules of thumb that make this murmuration possible without having all of the birds colliding into each other. So what are those collective flock dynamics at play? Well, one thing that you're seeing is the fact that rather than them focusing on the bird that's completely farthest away from them, there is a localized focus to this choreography. Each bird is only focusing on the neighborhood of birds around it, the birds in front of it and to its sides. And because these neighborhoods are interconnected and overlap, there's also this sense of repulsion where birds like to maintain a certain distance from other birds to avoid colliding. Add on top of that each bird is just focused on the simple shifts from bird to bird. You have this sense of progression that comes from each bird just shifting just slightly. And with that, there's a timing at play as well. When there is a sense of safety and comfort, the flock is actually more spread out and the speed is a little bit calmer and slower. But once there's a perceived threat, that's actually when all of the birds come together and there's this concentration and this density of the birds that takes place. And it's during this concentration of the birds that the information shockwave actually accelerates through the entire flock, and they actually pivot together a lot faster and a lot stronger. And so when there's another sense of safety, that is actually when the birds will spread back out, back into a more expanded sense of the murmuration. And so this idea of cadence is really interesting and timing. And then also, even though you see all of these birds all over the place, and even though it might seem to be chaotic, there is an edge to the flock, which implies that there's a sense of overall cohesion, even if it seems to be undefined. All of the birds are still in unison and in community with each other, but their adaptability gives them, again, this sense of a malleable structure. If I could leave you all with anything, it's really just this idea of choreographed progression through a sense of being malleable. And you all are the individuals. You all are that resource, that framework, that malleable core essential material that is needed for the education system to become what it will have to become in order to reach all of the students that are out there isolated at home right now. And I look forward to your questions. And thank you again so much for your time and for having me. And you all have a great day.